My name is Amelia White, and I am 32 years old. For 3 years, I believed my dying grandmother never wanted to see me one last time. My brother Marcus swore on our mother's grave that Grandma Rose never called, never asked for me, never even mentioned my name during her final weeks. The guilt consumed me for years until a random conversation with a telecommunications engineer changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Standing in that courthouse last Tuesday, holding a manila folder containing cell tower records that proved my brother had been lying for 3 years, I realized that some betrayals cut so deep they reshape your entire understanding of who you are and where you come from. What I discovered in those phone records didn't just expose Marcus's deception, it revealed a pattern of manipulation that had been controlling my life since childhood. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, the White family looked picture perfect from the outside. Our father, Robert White, owned a successful insurance agency that had been serving the community for over 20 years. Our mother, Patricia, worked as a high school guidance counselor and was beloved by students and parents alike. Marcus, my older brother by 4 years, was the golden child who could do no wrong in anyone's eyes. From my earliest memories, Marcus had a gift for making himself look good while making me look bad. When we were children, he would break something valuable and convince me that I had done it, complete with detailed explanations of how my clumsiness had caused the damage. By the time our parents investigated, Marcus had already cleaned up the evidence and positioned himself as the helpful brother, trying to protect me from getting in trouble. When I was 8 years old, our cat Whiskers went missing. I spent days crying and searching the neighborhood, putting up flyers and asking everyone if they had seen her. Marcus comforted me, helped me make the flyers, and even organized a search party with the neighborhood kids. 3 weeks later, I found Whiskers locked in our storage shed, dehydrated and weak, but alive. When I asked Marcus how she could have gotten trapped in there, he suggested that I must have accidentally locked her in while playing hide and seek. I accepted his explanation because the alternative was too horrible to consider. The pattern continued throughout our childhood and teenage years. When money went missing from Mom's purse, Marcus would suggest that I might have taken it for candy and forgotten to mention it. When Dad's golf clubs were damaged, Marcus would recall seeing me in the garage that morning. Each incident was small enough to seem like an accident or misunderstanding, but together they painted a picture of me as careless, forgetful, and slightly untrustworthy. Marcus excelled in school while I struggled with learning disabilities that weren't properly diagnosed until high school. He was student body president, captain of the debate team, and earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University. I barely graduated and ended up at a community college studying photography because it was one of the few subjects that made sense to my dyslexic brain. The family dynamics were clear. Marcus was the responsible one, the achiever, the son our parents could count on. I was the artistic one, the dreamer, the daughter who needed guidance and protection. Marcus was always happy to provide that protection, stepping in to speak for me during family meetings, making decisions about my education and career path, and generally positioning himself as my guardian and spokesperson. Our grandmother, Rose Martinez, was the one person who saw through Marcus's facade. She had immigrated from Mexico in the 1960s and built a successful restaurant business through sheer determination and an ability to read people that came from decades of dealing with difficult customers and unreliable employees. Grandma Rose could spot a manipulation from across the room, and she never hesitated to call it out. She lived in a small house about 30 minutes from our family home, and I spent countless afternoons there learning to cook traditional Mexican dishes and listening to stories about her childhood in Guadalajara. Grandma Rose spoke to me in a mixture of English and Spanish, teaching me words and phrases that connected me to a heritage Marcus seemed less interested in embracing. Marcus rarely visited Grandma Rose alone. He would come to family gatherings and be polite and charming, but he never sought out one-on-one time with her the way I did.
She once told me that Marcus reminded her of her late husband's brother, a man who could convince anyone of anything, but whose word was worth nothing when it really mattered. When I was 26, I made a decision that created a permanent rift in my family. I had been working as a freelance photographer for several years, taking wedding photos and family portraits to pay the bills, while pursuing more artistic projects on the side. A gallery in Santa Fe offered me a chance to display my work in a group exhibition, but the timing conflicted with Marcus's wedding to his longtime girlfriend, Jennifer. The exhibition was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The gallery owner had connections throughout the Southwest art scene, and several collectors would be attending the opening. For a photographer trying to transition from commercial work to fine art, this was the break I had been hoping for since college. Marcus's wedding was elaborate and expensive, planned for the same weekend as my exhibition. When I told my family about the conflict, Marcus immediately positioned it as a choice between family loyalty and selfish ambition. He suggested that I was prioritizing his hobby over his most important day, and that a real sister would never even consider missing her brother's wedding for something as trivial as hanging pictures in a gallery. The pressure from my family was overwhelming. My parents had already committed significant money to the wedding, flying in relatives from across the country and paying for an expensive reception venue. Marcus painted my decision as a betrayal that would embarrass the entire family and potentially ruin his wedding day. But Grandma Rose pulled me aside the week before the wedding and told me something I will never forget. She said that she had spent her entire life watching people choose safety over dreams, and that most of them regretted it for the rest of their lives. She told me that Marcus would have other celebrations, but opportunities like the gallery exhibition might never come again. Against my family's wishes, I attended the exhibition in Santa Fe. The opening was everything I had hoped for. 3 of my photographs sold that night, and a collector from Denver commissioned a series of landscape portraits that would keep me busy for the next 6 months. More importantly, I met Rebecca Chen, a gallery owner from Los Angeles who would become both a mentor and a dear friend. The fallout from missing Marcus's wedding was severe. My parents barely spoke to me for months, and Marcus made it clear that I had chosen my career over family. He told everyone who would listen that I had selfishly abandoned the family during one of our most important celebrations, and that my absence had cast a shadow over what should have been the happiest day of his life.
The only person who supported my decision was Grandma Rose. She called me the week after the wedding to congratulate me on my success and to tell me how proud she was that I had chosen to bet on myself. She said that the family would eventually forgive me, but that I would never forgive myself if I had given up the opportunity. Over the next 3 years, my relationship with Marcus remained strained. We were polite at family gatherings, but the easy closeness we had shared during childhood was gone. He had become distant and formal with me, always correct but never warm. I assumed this was simply the natural consequence of my decision to prioritize my career over his wedding. During this period, my photography business flourished. The contacts I made in Santa Fe led to exhibitions in Denver, Austin, and eventually Los Angeles. Rebecca Chen became my representative, helping me navigate the art world and connect with collectors who appreciated my work. I was finally making a living doing something I loved, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something that belonged entirely to me. Grandma Rose followed my career with pride and enthusiasm. She would clip newspaper articles about my exhibitions and keep them in a scrapbook, and she never missed an opening if it was within driving distance. She told me once that watching me succeed as an artist reminded her of her own dreams of opening a second restaurant, dreams she had abandoned when my grandfather became ill. In the spring of 3 years ago, Grandma Rose was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came suddenly, during what we thought was a routine checkup for stomach pain she had been experiencing. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe less, depending on how aggressively she wanted to pursue treatment. Grandma Rose decided against chemotherapy. She had watched too many friends suffer through treatments that bought them a few extra months of misery, and she preferred to spend her remaining time as herself rather than as a shadow weakened by medical interventions. She moved into a hospice care facility in Scottsdale, about an hour from my apartment in Phoenix.
I visited her twice a week during those final months, bringing photos from my latest projects and listening to stories I had heard dozens of times but never grew tired of hearing. She remained sharp and engaged until almost the very end, offering advice about my career and asking detailed questions about my relationships and future plans. Marcus visited less frequently. He lived in Tucson with Jennifer and their two young children, and he explained that the drive to Scottsdale was difficult with his work schedule and family obligations. When he did visit, he was attentive and caring, but I noticed that Grandma Rose seemed more subdued when he was around, less likely to share the candid observations and family stories that characterized our private conversations. 3 months into her illness, I had to travel to New York for a gallery exhibition that Rebecca had worked for months to arrange. The timing was terrible, but the exhibition was a crucial step in expanding my reach to East Coast collectors. I agonized over the decision, but Grandma Rose insisted that I go, reminding me that she would still be there when I returned and that opportunities like this were exactly why she had encouraged me to pursue my art in the first place. The trip to New York was successful beyond my expectations. Two major collectors purchased pieces, and a museum curator expressed interest in including my work in an upcoming group exhibition. But throughout the trip, I felt anxious about being away from Grandma Rose, calling the hospice facility twice a day to check on her condition. When I returned to Phoenix 5 days later, I rushed straight to the hospice facility, eager to share news about the exhibition and to resume our daily visits. But when I arrived, the nurse told me that Grandma Rose had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 days earlier.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The funeral arrangements had already been made. Marcus had handled everything, working with our parents to organize a service that reflected Grandma Rose's Catholic faith and Mexican heritage. I felt grateful that I didn't have to deal with the logistics while grieving, but also strangely disconnected from the process, as if I was attending the funeral of someone I had known less intimately than I actually had. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Standing in that funeral home, looking at Grandma Rose in her casket surrounded by white lilies and flickering candles, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed her when she needed me most. The woman who had supported my dreams and encouraged my independence had died alone while I was networking with art collectors 3,000 miles away. Marcus approached me during the viewing, his expression somber and protective in that familiar way that made him look like the responsible older brother comforting his grieving sister. He placed his hand on my shoulder and spoke in the gentle tone he used when he wanted others to overhear his compassion. "Don't blame yourself, Amelia," he said, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Grandma Rose understood that your career had to come first. She wouldn't want you to feel guilty about being in New York when it happened." His words were meant to be comforting, but something about the way he phrased it made me uncomfortable. The suggestion that I had put my career before family echoed the same criticism he had made about missing his wedding, and I wondered if he was using Grandma Rose's death to reinforce that narrative. After the funeral, our extended family gathered at my parents' house for a traditional Mexican meal that Grandma Rose would have loved. Cousins, aunts, and uncles shared stories about her strength, her cooking, and her fierce loyalty to family. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice something strange in their interactions with me. Several relatives made comments that suggested they believed I had been absent during Grandma Rose's final weeks, not just during the 5 days I was in New York. My cousin Sophia mentioned how hard it must have been for me to be so far away during such a difficult time. Uncle Carlos patted my arm sympathetically and said he understood that work commitments sometimes made it impossible to be there for family. When I tried to correct these misunderstandings, explaining that I had been visiting twice a week until my New York trip, the relatives looked confused. Marcus smoothly intervened each time, suggesting that grief was making it hard for everyone to remember the timeline clearly, and that what mattered was that we were all here now to honor Grandma Rose's memory. But their confusion bothered me. Why did they think I had been absent for weeks rather than days? I had assumed that Marcus or my parents had explained my travel schedule to the extended family, but clearly there had been some miscommunication. Later that evening, after most of the relatives had gone home, I was helping my mother clean up when she mentioned something that stopped me cold. "I'm just glad that Rose didn't suffer at the end," Mom said, scraping plates into the garbage disposal.
Marcus said she kept asking for you during those final weeks, wondering why you weren't coming to visit anymore. I set down the dish I was drying and stared at her. What do you mean, asking for me? I was visiting her twice a week until I left for New York. The nurses can confirm that. Mom looked confused. Marcus said you hadn't been to see her since early March. He was worried about how hurt she seemed, but he didn't want to pressure you since you were dealing with work stress. March. I tried to process this information. Grandma Rose had died in late April, and I had been visiting her consistently throughout March and most of April, right up until my departure for New York. Why would Marcus tell our mother that I hadn't visited since early March? Mom, there's been a misunderstanding, I said carefully. I was visiting Grandma Rose regularly. I have photos on my phone from our visits. I brought her pictures from the Denver exhibition just 2 weeks before I left for New York. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to concern. But Marcus said he was updating us on her condition because you were too busy with work to visit regularly. He said you felt terrible about it, but that your exhibition schedule was demanding. A cold realization began forming in my mind. Marcus had been controlling the narrative about my relationship with Grandma Rose, just as he had done throughout our childhood. But this time, his manipulation had prevented me from understanding how my absence was being perceived by my dying grandmother and my family. Did Marcus ever mention that Grandma Rose was asking to speak with me specifically? I asked. Did she try to call me during those final weeks? Mom hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Marcus was talking with Dad about baseball scores. She did ask Marcus to call you a few times, she admitted quietly, but he said you were overwhelmed with work and that it might be better to let you focus on your exhibition. He thought visiting the hospice was too emotionally draining for you on top of everything else. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was so disturbing that I couldn't quite accept it yet. Marcus had been acting as a gatekeeper between me and Grandma Rose, filtering communication and creating a false narrative about my availability and priorities. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake my suspicions about Marcus's role in my absence during Grandma Rose's final days. I began paying closer attention to his interactions with family members, and I started noticing patterns I had overlooked before. During family dinners, Marcus would often speak for me before I could respond to questions about my work or personal life. He would explain my schedule to relatives, describe my emotional state, and interpret my motivations in ways that weren't always accurate, but that positioned him as the caring brother who understood me better than I understood myself. When I received a photography commission that required travel to Colorado, Marcus mentioned to my parents that I was running away from family responsibilities again before I had even told them about the job. When I started dating a fellow photographer named David, Marcus expressed concern to my mother about my tendency to get involved with unstable artistic types who might not be good long-term partners. Each individual comment seemed reasonable or even caring, but together they painted a picture of me as someone who needed guidance and protection, someone whose judgment couldn't be trusted, someone who might make selfish decisions without considering their impact on family. The more I observed these patterns, the more I began to question everything Marcus had told me about Grandma Rose's final days. If he was still manipulating family perceptions about my life and choices, what had he been telling Grandma Rose about my absence? And more importantly, had she actually tried to contact me directly?
3 months after the funeral, I was having coffee with Rebecca Chen during one of her visits to Phoenix when I found myself telling her about my growing suspicions. Rebecca had met Grandma Rose at one of my exhibitions and had been genuinely fond of her, so she understood the depth of my grief and confusion. "It sounds like your brother has a pattern of controlling information flow," Rebecca observed. "In my experience, people who do that usually have something to hide. Have you considered that your grandmother might have tried to reach you directly?" The suggestion hit me like a revelation. In all my questioning about what Marcus had told family members, I had never considered that Grandma Rose might have attempted to contact me herself. She had always been independent and direct in her communication, and it would have been completely in character for her to call me personally if she wanted to see me. I checked my phone records from April, looking for any missed calls from the hospice facility or from Grandma Rose's personal cell phone, but there was nothing. No missed calls, no voicemails, no text messages that I might have overlooked. But as I scrolled through my call log, I realized something that made my stomach drop. There were several periods during April when my call history showed gaps that didn't make sense.
Days when I should have had routine work calls or personal conversations, but my phone log showed no activity at all. At first, I assumed this was a glitch in my phone's memory or a problem with my service provider. But the more I examined the records, the more suspicious the gaps appeared. They were too systematic, too complete, and they coincided with periods when I was away from my phone for extended periods. During the final weeks of Grandma Rosa's life, I had been working on a demanding portrait series that required me to spend long hours in my darkroom, where I always left my phone in the main studio to avoid interruptions. Marcus knew this routine because he had visited my studio several times and had commented on my old-fashioned approach to film development. A terrible possibility began forming in my mind. Marcus had access to my studio because I had given him a spare key years earlier, back when we still had a close relationship, and he occasionally helped me move equipment. What if he had been monitoring my phone during those darkroom sessions? What if he had been deleting calls and messages that would have connected me with Grandma Rose? The idea seemed paranoid, but it also explained everything that had been bothering me about the family's perceptions and my own guilt. If Grandma Rose had been trying to reach me, and if Marcus had been preventing those communications from getting through while simultaneously telling her that I was too busy to visit, then her final weeks would have been exactly as painful as my relatives had described. I needed proof, but I wasn't sure how to get it. Phone companies kept detailed records, but accessing them would require either a court order or cooperation from Marcus himself. And if I was wrong about his involvement, accusing my brother of such deliberate cruelty would destroy what remained of our relationship and potentially tear our family apart. But if I was right, then Marcus had stolen my last chance to say goodbye to the woman who had believed in me when no one else would. He had allowed me to carry guilt that wasn't mine, while protecting himself from any responsibility for the pain he had caused. The decision to investigate further came when I was cleaning out my studio and found an old appointment book where I had been tracking my visits to Grandma Rose. The entry showed clearly that I had maintained regular visits right up until my departure for New York, contradicting everything Marcus had told our family. Looking at those careful notes in my own handwriting, documenting every conversation and every small gift I had brought to brighten Grandma Rose's days, I realized that I couldn't let Marcus's version of events stand unchallenged. The truth mattered, both for my own peace of mind and for Grandma Rose's memory. She deserved to be remembered accurately as someone who was surrounded by love rather than abandoned by a selfish granddaughter. And I deserved to know whether my guilt was justified or whether it was just another manipulation in a lifetime of Marcus's carefully constructed lies. My investigation began with a phone call to the hospice facility where Grandma Rose had spent her final months. I explained that I was her granddaughter and that I needed to clarify some details about her care for insurance purposes. The nurse who had been assigned to Grandma Rose's case, Maria Santos, remembered both me and my regular visits. "You were so devoted to her," Maria said warmly. "Coming twice a week is like clockwork, always bringing those beautiful photographs to show her. She used to tell me how proud she was of your art career." "Maria, I need to ask you something important," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "During those final 2 weeks in April, did my grandmother ever ask you to help her contact me? Did she seem confused about why I wasn't visiting?" There was a pause. "Actually, yes. During her last week, she kept asking when you were coming to see her. She seemed agitated about it, which was unusual because she was normally so calm and accepting of everything. She asked me several times if we could call you, but your brother said he was handling all the family communication." My heart began racing. What exactly did my brother tell you? "He said that you were dealing with work stress and that family visits were overwhelming you right now. He asked us not to call you directly because it might make you feel pressured. He said he would coordinate any necessary communication." The picture was becoming clearer, but I needed more concrete evidence. I thanked Maria and hung up, then immediately called my cell phone provider. After being transferred through 3 different departments, I finally reached a supervisor who could access detailed call records. "I need to see all incoming calls and text messages for my number during the month of April," I explained, "including any calls that were answered but didn't connect to voicemail." The supervisor explained that while they could provide basic call logs, detailed information about answered calls would require either a court order or law enforcement request. However, they could show me all incoming call attempts, regardless of whether they connected. 20 minutes later, I was staring at an email attachment that changed everything. The detailed call log showed 17 incoming calls from Grandma Rose's phone number during the final 3 weeks of her life. According to my phone's internal log, none of these calls had registered as received. But according to the cell tower records, they had all connected to my phone and been answered. Someone had been answering Grandma Rose's calls and telling the cell network that the calls had been handled, preventing them from going to voicemail or showing up in my missed call list. The only person with access to my phone during the times these calls were answered was Marcus. I printed out the call records and compared them to my work schedule. Every single call from Grandma Rose had come during hours when I was in my darkroom, when my phone was sitting unattended in the main studio, where Marcus could access it with his spare key. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed proof that Marcus had actually been in my studio during those times. I remembered that my building had security cameras in the hallway, but I wasn't sure how long they kept the footage. The next morning, I visited my building's management office and explained that I needed to review security footage from April for insurance purposes, claiming that some expensive equipment had gone missing and I needed to document when people had access to my studio. The property manager, Mr. Peterson, was sympathetic and agreed to let me review the footage. Sitting in the cramped security office, watching grainy black and white footage on a small monitor, I fast-forwarded through hours of empty hallway. Then, at 2:17 p.m. on April 18th, I saw Marcus entering my studio. According to the call records, Grandma Rose had called my phone at 2:23 p.m. that same day. I asked Mr. Peterson to burn copies of the relevant footage onto a DVD, explaining that I might need it for legal purposes. He complied without asking too many questions, probably assuming it was related to a theft investigation. With the security footage and call records in hand, I had proof that Marcus had been in my studio when Grandma Rose's calls were answered. But I still needed to understand exactly what he had told her during those conversations. That information could only come from Marcus himself, and confronting him directly would give him a chance to destroy any remaining evidence. Instead, I decided to talk to Jennifer, Marcus's wife. She had always been kind to me, and I sensed that she sometimes felt uncomfortable with Marcus's controlling behavior, though she had never said anything directly. I invited Jennifer to lunch, suggesting that we should spend more time together as sisters-in-law. We met at a quiet restaurant in Scottsdale, far from where we might run into other family members. After some initial small talk about her children and my photography work, I carefully steered the conversation toward family relationships. "I've been struggling with guilt about Grandma Rose," I admitted. "I feel like I should have been there more during her final weeks." Jennifer's expression grew troubled. "You know, Marcus has been dealing with guilt about that situation too," she said quietly. "He's been really stressed since the funeral." "What kind of guilt?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Jennifer hesitated, glancing around the restaurant as if checking for eavesdroppers. "He told me that your grandmother was calling you constantly during those last weeks, but that he thought the calls were upsetting you because you were so overwhelmed with work. He said he started answering your phone when she called, telling her that you were in meetings or traveling, hoping to spare you both the stress." My hands trembled as I reached for my water glass. "He answered my phone?" "He said he was trying to protect you both, your grandmother from feeling rejected and you from feeling pressured. But afterward, he realized that maybe he made the wrong choice. He's been wondering if he should have let the calls go through, even if they upset you." The confession was devastating and vindicating at the same time. Marcus had been answering Grandma Rose's calls, lying to her about my availability, and allowing me to believe that she had never tried to contact me. But according to Jennifer, he was now experiencing guilt about his decision. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "did Marcus ever mention what he told Grandma Rose during those conversations?" She nodded, her expression increasingly uncomfortable. "He said he usually told her that you were working on an important project and couldn't be interrupted, but that you would call her back when you had time. He thought it sounded better than saying you were too stressed to talk." "But I never knew about the calls, so I never called her back." "Right," Jennifer said slowly, as the implications began to sink in. "She must have thought you were ignoring her." I excused myself to the restroom, where I stood in front of the mirror trying to process what I had learned. Marcus hadn't just prevented me from receiving Grandma Rose's calls, he had actively deceived her about why I wasn't responding. In her final weeks, when she was scared and dying and reaching out for connection, he had made her believe that I was too busy and important to spare time for her. When I returned to the table, Jennifer was staring at her untouched salad, clearly troubled by our conversation. "Amelia, are you going to tell the family about this?" "I'm not sure yet," I said honestly. "I'm still trying to understand exactly what happened and why." "Marcus thought he was helping," Jennifer said, but her voice lacked conviction. "He said family drama was the last thing you needed while you were preparing for your New York exhibition." "Jennifer, did it ever occur to Marcus that maybe I should have been the one to decide whether or not to take my grandmother's calls?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I think Marcus has always felt responsible for managing family situations," she said finally. "Sometimes I think he forgets that other people are capable of making their own decisions."
After lunch, I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot, staring at my phone and thinking about all the conversations I had never had with Grandma Rose. 17 calls that had been intercepted, 17 opportunities for connection that had been stolen from both of us. I thought about her final weeks, imagining her confusion and hurt when I never called back, never acknowledged her attempts to reach out. Marcus had allowed her to die, believing that her granddaughter was too successful and self-absorbed to spare time for a dying woman. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but what made it even worse was that Marcus apparently saw himself as the helpful family mediator rather than the manipulator he actually was. In his mind, he had been protecting everyone from uncomfortable emotions, managing the situation like a benevolent dictator who knew what was best for all parties involved. But I still needed to understand his full motivation. The pattern of behavior went back to childhood, and this latest manipulation seemed more elaborate and sustained than his previous efforts. What was he trying to achieve by isolating me from Grandma Rose? What did he gain by ensuring that she died thinking I didn't care about her? The answer came to me that evening as I was reviewing Grandma Rose's will, which had been read shortly after her funeral. She had left small amounts of money to various grandchildren and relatives, but the bulk of her estate, including her house and savings, had been divided equally between Marcus and me. At the time, I had been surprised by the equal division, since Marcus had always been less involved in her daily life. But now I wondered if Marcus had been concerned about how Grandma Rose viewed our respective relationships with her. Had he been worried that my regular visits and close bond with her might influence how she distributed her assets? If Marcus had succeeded in making Grandma Rose believe that I was too busy and selfish to visit her during her final illness, it would have justified any decision to reduce my inheritance in favor of the grandson who was supposedly managing all her care and communication. The financial motive added another layer of calculation to Marcus's deception. He hadn't just been managing family communication out of misguided protectiveness. He had been actively working to damage my relationship with Grandma Rose in a way that could have benefited him financially. But the will hadn't been changed, which meant that either Grandma Rose had died before she could modify it, or she had maintained faith in me despite Marcus's manipulation. Either way, the evidence was now overwhelming that Marcus had systematically deceived both me and Grandma Rose for his own purposes. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. I had proof of Marcus's actions, but confronting him would likely result in denial and counter-accusations. I needed a strategy that would force him to acknowledge the truth and prevent him from manipulating our family dynamics in the future. I spent 3 sleepless nights weighing my options before deciding on a course of action that would force Marcus to confront the truth without giving him time to prepare defensive lies. The plan required careful timing and the help of someone Marcus trusted completely, our father. Dad had always prided himself on his fairness and integrity, values that had made his insurance agency successful in a business built on trust. If I could present him with irrefutable evidence of Marcus's deception, he would be compelled to address it, regardless of his preference for avoiding family conflict. I called Dad on a Thursday morning and asked if I could meet with him privately at his office. I explained that I had discovered some troubling information about Grandma Rose's final weeks that the family needed to discuss, but that I wanted his advice on how to handle it sensitively. Dad agreed to see me that afternoon. His office, located in a small professional building near downtown Phoenix, reflected his practical nature: functional furniture, family photos on the desk, and industry awards arranged neatly on the walls.
He had built his business on straightforward dealing and honest communication, principles that made him respected in the community. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. "You sounded upset on the phone." I spread the printed call records, security footage screenshots, and my handwritten timeline across his desk. "Dad, I need to show you something that's going to be difficult to hear. It's about Marcus and what really happened during Grandma Rose's final weeks." His expression grew serious as I walked him through the evidence methodically. The call logs show 17 attempts from Grandma Rose that never reached me. The security footage proving Marcus was in my studio when the calls were answered. Jennifer's admission that Marcus had been deliberately intercepting the calls and lying to Grandma Rose about my availability. Dad studied each piece of evidence carefully, his face growing increasingly grim. As a businessman who dealt with insurance fraud investigations, he understood the significance of documented proof and corroborating testimony. "This is very serious, Amelia," he said finally. "If what you're showing me is accurate, Marcus deliberately prevented you from communicating with your dying grandmother while allowing her to believe you were ignoring her." "It gets worse, Dad. The hospice nurse confirmed that Grandma Rose was agitated during her final week because she couldn't understand why I wasn't responding to her calls. She died thinking I didn't care enough to talk to her." Dad removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture I recognized from childhood when he was processing difficult information. "What do you want me to do with this?" "I want you to be present when I confront Marcus. He's been manipulating family situations since we were children, and I need a witness who can't be dismissed or manipulated. He needs to be held accountable for what he did to Grandma Rose." "And what about the family? This kind of revelation could tear us apart." I had anticipated this concern. The family has already been torn apart. Marcus has been controlling information and managing perceptions for years. The only difference is that now we have proof of how far he's willing to go. We agreed that Dad would arrange a family meeting for the following Sunday, ostensibly to discuss some of Grandma Rose's belongings that still needed to be distributed. He would ask Marcus to bring any remaining items from her house, creating a context where discussing her final weeks would seem natural. The days leading up to the confrontation were agonizing. I rehearsed what I would say, anticipating Marcus's likely responses, and preparing for his attempts to deflect or minimize his actions. I also prepared myself for the possibility that some family members might side with Marcus, choosing to maintain family unity over acknowledging an uncomfortable truth. Sunday arrived with typical Arizona sunshine, the kind of perfect weather that made serious conversations feel surreal. I arrived at my parents' house 30 minutes early, wanting to review the evidence one more time with Dad before Marcus and Jennifer arrived with their children. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, preparing lunch and chattering about the grandchildren's upcoming school activities. She had no idea what was about to unfold, and I felt guilty about the pain this revelation would cause her. But I reminded myself that the pain wasn't my doing, it was the consequence of Marcus's choices. Marcus arrived precisely on time as always, carrying a box of Grandma Rose's jewelry and personal items. He hugged Mom, shook Dad's hand, and gave me a polite nod before settling into his usual position in Dad's recliner, the symbolic head of family seat he had claimed during previous gatherings. Jennifer looked tired, and I wondered if our lunch conversation had been weighing on her. She helped Mom set the table, while Marcus entertained his children with stories, playing the role of the devoted family man with practiced ease. After lunch, Dad suggested that the adults move to the living room to discuss Grandma Rose's remaining belongings, while the children played in the backyard. Marcus began unpacking the box, holding up pieces of jewelry, and explaining where he thought each item should go. "Before we divide these up," Dad interrupted, "Amelia has discovered some information about Grandma Rose's final weeks that we need to discuss as a family."
Marcus looked up sharply, his expression shifting from casual to alert. "What kind of information?" I pulled out the folder containing my evidence. Information about the phone calls Grandma Rose made to me during her final weeks, the calls that I never received because someone was answering my phone and lying to her about why I couldn't talk. The color drained from Marcus's face, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "I have call records showing 17 calls from Grandma Rose's number to my phone during April. According to the cell tower data, these calls were answered, but they never showed up in my call log and I never received any messages." "Phone companies make mistakes," Marcus said dismissively. "Those records aren't always accurate." I placed the security footage screenshots on the coffee table. These are from my building's security cameras. They show you entering my studio at the exact times when Grandma Rose's calls were being answered. Marcus studied the images, his jaw tightening. I had your permission to use your studio key. Sometimes I stopped by to check on your equipment when you were traveling. You weren't checking on equipment, Marcus. You were answering Grandma Rose's calls and telling her I was too busy to talk to her. That's ridiculous, he said, but his voice had lost its confident tone. Why would I do something like that? Jennifer spoke up quietly from her position on the couch. Because you told me you were doing it. You said you were protecting Amelia from stress by handling Grandma Rose's calls yourself. The betrayal hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at his wife with an expression of shocked hurt, as if she had violated some unspoken agreement to support his version of events, regardless of the truth. Jennifer, you're misremembering, he said desperately. I may have mentioned screening a few calls, but it wasn't systematic. I was just trying to help. Mom, who had been listening in growing horror, finally found her voice. Marcus, did you prevent Amelia from talking to her dying grandmother? It wasn't like that, Marcus said, his composure finally cracking. Amelia was overwhelmed with work. She was preparing for that New York exhibition, and I could see how stressed she was. When Grandma Rose called constantly, wanting attention and sympathy, I thought it would be better to handle the situation myself. Wanting attention and sympathy? I repeated, my voice rising. She was dying, Marcus. She was scared and alone, and she wanted to talk to her granddaughter. She wasn't alone, Marcus protested. I was visiting her. I was handling her care coordination. I was the one dealing with the medical decisions and the hospice arrangements while you were focused on your career. Dad leaned forward in his chair. Marcus, that doesn't justify preventing Amelia from receiving calls from her grandmother. That wasn't your decision to make. I was protecting the family, Marcus insisted. Do you know how many times Grandma Rose called during those final weeks? She was becoming obsessive, demanding constant attention. She would have consumed all of Amelia's time and energy right when she needed to focus on the biggest opportunity of her career. The twisted logic of his justification was breathtaking. In Marcus's mind, he had been the responsible family member making practical decisions about resource allocation. Grandma Rose's emotional needs during her final weeks were inconveniences to be managed rather than priorities to be honored. So you decided that my career was more important than saying goodbye to Grandma Rose? I asked. You made that choice for me without consulting me? You had already shown where your priorities were, Marcus shot back, his careful mask finally slipping completely. You missed my wedding for a gallery opening. You chose your art over family then, so I assumed you'd make the same choice again. There it was, the real motivation behind his manipulation. Marcus hadn't been protecting me from stress. He had been punishing me for missing his wedding 3 years earlier. This was about your wedding? Mom asked in disbelief. You prevented your sister from saying goodbye to her dying grandmother because you were still angry about her missing your wedding? It wasn't just about the wedding, Marcus said defensively. It was about a pattern of putting her career ahead of family responsibilities. Someone needed to teach her that actions have consequences. The room fell silent, except for the sound of children playing in the backyard, their laughter a stark contrast to the devastation unfolding in the living room. Marcus had finally revealed the calculating nature of his manipulation, and there was no way to unsay the words or soften their impact. Dad stood up slowly, his face pale with anger and disappointment. Marcus, what you did was cruel and inexcusable. You robbed your sister of her final conversations with her grandmother, and you allowed Rose to die thinking she was being ignored by someone she loved. I was managing a difficult situation, Marcus said weakly. I was trying to balance everyone's needs. No, I said firmly. You were playing God with other people's relationships. You decided that Grandma Rose didn't deserve my attention, and you decided that I didn't deserve the chance to say goodbye. Those weren't your decisions to make. Jennifer gathered her purse and called to her children, clearly wanting to escape the toxic atmosphere that Marcus's confessions had created. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to face the family. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, she said quietly. I knew something felt wrong about the situation, but I trusted Marcus's judgment.
I should have realized that no one has the right to control other people's relationships, even with good intentions. As Jennifer and the children left, Marcus sat alone in the recliner that had once symbolized his position as the responsible family leader. Now it looked like a throne from which he had issued decrees that destroyed the very relationships he claimed to be protecting. The aftermath of that Sunday confrontation rippled through our family like an earthquake, fracturing relationships and forcing everyone to reassess decades of assumptions about Marcus's character and motivations. In the days following his confession, I found myself dealing not only with my own anger and grief, but with the complex task of helping my parents process their shock and disappointment. Dad called me the next evening, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I've been thinking about this all day, Amelia. How many other situations has Marcus manipulated over the years? How many times did we accept his version of events without questioning it?" It was a question I had been asking myself since childhood, but now my parents were finally ready to examine the pattern. Mom, in particular, seemed devastated by the realization that she had unknowingly enabled Marcus's controlling behavior by always deferring to his judgment about family matters. "I thought he was being helpful," she told me during a tearful phone conversation. "When he would explain your motivations or speak for you during family discussions, I thought it showed how well he understood you. I never realized he was controlling the narrative to serve his own purposes."
The revelation forced my parents to confront uncomfortable truths about their own parenting. They had unconsciously reinforced Marcus's position as the family spokesman by treating his interpretations as authoritative, never thinking to verify his claims with the people he was supposedly representing. Marcus, meanwhile, had retreated into defensive silence. According to Mom, he had called to apologize for any misunderstanding about his handling of the Grandma Rose situation, but he stopped short of acknowledging the deliberate cruelty of his actions. Instead, he maintained that his intentions had been good, even if his execution had been flawed. This half-hearted apology revealed something crucial about Marcus's psychology. Even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of his manipulation, he couldn't fully accept responsibility for the harm he had caused. His identity was so wrapped up in being the responsible, protective older brother that admitting to calculated cruelty would require a complete reconstruction of his self-image. Jennifer, however, was experiencing no such internal conflict. She called me a week after the family meeting to apologize more thoroughly and to provide additional information that shed new light on Marcus's behavior patterns. "I've been thinking about other times when Marcus seemed to manage information flow," she said, "like when your photography was featured in that magazine last year. I found out about it from a friend who saw it online, but Marcus told me he had decided not to mention it to you because he thought the attention might go to your head." "He never told me about the magazine feature," I said, feeling a familiar chill of recognition. "There have been other instances too, job opportunities that he heard about through business connections but never passed along to you. Social events where he would decline invitations on your behalf, claiming you were too busy or wouldn't be interested." Each revelation painted a picture of systematic isolation. Marcus hadn't just been managing family perceptions about my character, he had been actively limiting my opportunities and social connections while positioning himself as the helpful brother who was protecting me from unwanted obligations. The scope of his manipulation was staggering, but what troubled me most was how invisible it had been. Because Marcus's interventions were always framed as protective or helpful, no one had recognized them as controlling behavior. He had perfected the art of manipulation disguised as care. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I made a decision that surprised even me. I hired a family therapist, not for myself, but to facilitate a structured conversation with Marcus that might lead to genuine accountability rather than superficial apologies. Dr. Sarah Martinez specialized in family conflict resolution and had experience dealing with manipulation dynamics. After I explained the situation and provided her with copies of the evidence, she agreed to mediate a meeting between Marcus and me with the understanding that the goal was truth-telling rather than reconciliation. Marcus initially refused to participate, claiming that involving a therapist was unnecessarily dramatic and that we should be able to resolve family issues privately.
But when Dad made it clear that family relationships would remain fractured until Marcus addressed his behavior honestly, he reluctantly agreed to attend one session. The meeting took place in Dr. Martinez's comfortable office on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus arrived dressed in his usual business attire, his posture rigid with defensive preparation. I had spent days thinking about what I wanted to say, but I also knew that Dr. Martinez would guide the conversation in ways that would prevent Marcus from deflecting or derailing the discussion. Marcus, Dr. Martinez began, Amelia has shared some specific concerns about your behavior during your grandmother's final illness. Rather than debating the details, I'd like you to help me understand your thought process during that time. What were you trying to accomplish when you intercepted those phone calls? The question was brilliant because it didn't allow Marcus to deny the behavior, it assumed the facts were established and asked him to explain his motivations. For several minutes, he tried to reframe the situation in terms of family management and stress reduction, but Dr. Martinez persistently brought him back to the central issue. When you answered Amelia's phone and told your grandmother that Amelia was too busy to talk, what did you think would happen? I thought Grandma Rose would understand that Amelia was dealing with work pressure and would stop calling so frequently. And what did you tell yourself about Amelia's right to make her own decisions about taking those calls? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, I thought I knew what was best for everyone involved. Even though you had no way of knowing what Amelia would actually choose if given the information. I knew her patterns, Marcus said defensively. I knew she would feel guilty and obligated and that it would interfere with her work focus. Dr. Martinez turned to me. Amelia, how do you respond to Marcus's assumption about your patterns and choices? I'm angry that he made decisions about my relationship with Grandma Rose without my knowledge or consent, I said. But I'm more hurt by the realization that he was willing to let her die thinking I didn't care about her, just to prove a point about my priorities. What point was that? Dr. Martinez asked Marcus. For the first time since the conversation began, Marcus looked genuinely uncomfortable. I wanted her to understand that choices have consequences, that putting career ahead of family relationships creates distance and hurt. So you created artificial distance and hurt to teach her a lesson about natural distance and hurt. The contradiction was stark when stated so plainly. Marcus had manufactured the exact problem he claimed to be concerned about, using his manipulation to create the family dysfunction he supposedly wanted to prevent. I can see now that my approach was wrong, Marcus said carefully. I should have let Amelia make her own choices about the phone calls. That's not enough, I said firmly. I need you to acknowledge that what you did was deliberately harmful. You didn't make a mistake in judgment. You made a calculated decision to hurt both me and Grandma Rose to satisfy your own need for control and revenge. Marcus flinched at the word revenge, but Dr. Martinez pressed him to respond. Is Amelia's characterization accurate? Were you motivated by anger about her missing your wedding? The question forced Marcus to confront the emotional truth behind his rational-sounding explanations. After a long silence, he nodded reluctantly. I was still hurt about the wedding. I felt like she had chosen strangers over family, and I wanted her to understand how that felt. So you made your dying grandmother feel chosen against, and you made Amelia live with guilt that wasn't hers to carry. I didn't think about it that way at the time, Marcus said quietly. But you understand it that way now? Another long pause. Yes, I understand that now. The admission was a breakthrough, but it also raised questions about the future. Dr. Martinez spent the remaining time helping us establish boundaries that would prevent future manipulation while leaving open the possibility of rebuilding trust over time. Marcus agreed to inform the family that he had been controlling information flow for years and to apologize specifically for the harm his actions had caused. He also committed to staying out of my professional and personal relationships unless explicitly asked for advice.
In return, I agreed to consider gradual re-engagement with family activities with the understanding that any future manipulation would result in permanent estrangement. As we left Dr. Martinez's office, Marcus turned to me in the parking lot. Amelia, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I never intended for Grandma Rose to suffer. I thought I was managing the situation, not causing pain. Intention doesn't erase impact, Marcus, I replied. Grandma Rose died thinking I abandoned her, and I lived with guilt that nearly destroyed me. Your good intentions don't minimize that harm. He nodded, looking older and more defeated than I had ever seen him. I know, I'm going to have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. As I drove home, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The truth had finally been acknowledged, and Marcus had been forced to confront the real impact of his actions. But the victory felt hollow because it couldn't bring back the conversations I had never had with Grandma Rose or erase the pain she had experienced during her final weeks. The process had also revealed uncomfortable truths about my own family dynamics and the ways that manipulation could flourish in environments where good intentions were assumed and authority was rarely questioned. Moving forward would require not just Marcus's behavioral changes, but fundamental shifts in how our entire family communicated and made decisions. That evening, I sat in my studio looking at the photographs I had taken of Grandma Rose during our final visits together. Her smile was radiant in those images, filled with pride and love for the granddaughter she believed was building something meaningful with her life. I realized that those photographs captured the truth of our relationship, regardless of the lies Marcus had told during her final weeks. Grandma Rose had known who I really was, and she had believed in me when others doubted. No amount of manipulation could change that fundamental truth, and no confession could take away the love and support she had given me throughout my life. 6 months after the truth came to light, I found myself standing in the same courthouse where I had first reviewed the cell tower records that exposed Marcus's deception. But this time, I wasn't there as an investigator seeking evidence. I was there as a witness in a legal proceeding that had grown out of our family's reckoning with manipulation and fraud. The case wasn't against Marcus, though his actions had certainly been morally reprehensible. Instead, I was testifying in support of legislation that would strengthen penalties for telecommunications fraud and unauthorized access to personal communications. A state senator who had read about my story in a local newspaper article had contacted me about using my experience to illustrate the need for better legal protections against digital manipulation. Sitting in the witness chair, looking out at a room filled with legislators, advocates, and reporters, I realized how far I had traveled from the broken, guilt-ridden woman who had believed she had failed her dying grandmother. The journey from victim to advocate had been neither quick nor easy, but it had given meaning to what could have remained simply a family tragedy. The months following Marcus's confession had brought unexpected changes to every aspect of my life. The therapeutic process had forced me to examine not just his manipulation, but my own patterns of accepting other people's definitions of reality. I had spent so many years allowing Marcus to interpret situations and speak for me that I had lost confidence in my own perceptions and judgment. Working with Dr. Martinez in individual sessions, I began to understand how manipulation victims often develop a kind of learned helplessness, becoming dependent on their manipulators for basic information about their own lives and relationships. Marcus hadn't just controlled specific situations, he had gradually eroded my sense of autonomy and self-trust. The recovery process involved reclaiming my voice in small, deliberate ways. I started making decisions without seeking Marcus's input or approval. I began reaching out directly to family members and friends instead of allowing him to relay messages or make social arrangements on my behalf. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own instincts about people and situations, even when others disagreed with my assessments. My photography work evolved as well, taking on new themes related to truth, perception, and hidden realities. I created a series called Invisible Manipulations that explored how power dynamics play out in everyday relationships. The series gained attention from critics and collectors who appreciated its psychological depth and social commentary. Rebecca Chen, my gallery representative, observed that my work had gained emotional complexity and authenticity that made it more compelling to viewers. "There's a rawness in these new pieces that wasn't there before," she told me during a studio visit. "It's as if you're photographing from a place of hard-won wisdom rather than natural talent alone." The success of the new work led to opportunities I couldn't have imagined during my years of accepting Marcus's limitations on my potential. I was invited to exhibit at galleries in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Art collectors who had never heard of my work began seeking out pieces from the Invisible Manipulation series.
But perhaps the most meaningful development was the scholarship foundation I had established in Grandma Rose's memory. The Rose Martinez Foundation provided grants specifically for young women whose family members discouraged their educational or career aspirations. The first recipient, Maria Santos, named after the hospice nurse who had confirmed Grandma Rose's final distress, was studying computer science at Arizona State University despite her father's insistence that technology was unsuitable work for women. When I met Maria at the scholarship award ceremony, she reminded me so much of myself at that age, brilliant, determined, but constantly having to justify her dreams to people who claimed to know what was best for her. Through our conversation, I realized that Marcus's manipulation had been an extreme version of a pattern that many women face, having their choices and perceptions questioned, dismissed, or overruled by family members who believe they are providing protection or guidance. The Foundation's work connected me with advocates, researchers, and other survivors of family manipulation. I learned that emotional abuse within families is often overlooked because it masquerades as care, concern, or traditional gender roles. Marcus's behavior had been particularly insidious because it appeared supportive on the surface while systematically undermining my autonomy and relationships. My relationship with my parents also required significant reconstruction. They struggled with guilt over their role in enabling Marcus's behavior, and it took months of family therapy sessions for us to develop new patterns of communication that didn't rely on Marcus as an intermediary or interpreter. Dad, in particular, had difficulty accepting that his conflict-avoidant parenting style had contributed to the problem. He had always preferred to let Marcus handle family communications and logistics because it seemed efficient and kept the peace. Learning that this delegation had enabled years of manipulation forced him to become more directly involved in family relationships. Mom's transformation was even more dramatic. She began speaking up in family discussions instead of deferring to Marcus's opinions, and she started forming independent relationships with each family member rather than relying on his reports and interpretations. The change was so significant that she enrolled in assertiveness training classes and eventually began volunteering with a domestic violence organization that helped women recognize emotional manipulation.
Marcus himself remained somewhat peripheral to these family changes. He had completed the commitments he made during our therapeutic session, acknowledging his manipulation to extended family members and apologizing for specific incidents of controlling behavior. But his apologies felt mechanical rather than heartfelt, suggesting that he understood intellectually what he had done wrong without fully grasping the emotional impact of his actions. Jennifer had filed for separation 3 months after the truth came out, explaining that she could no longer trust someone who was capable of such calculated deception. The divorce proceedings revealed additional instances of Marcus's controlling behavior within their marriage: financial decisions made without consultation, social obligations declined on Jennifer's behalf, and career opportunities that he had discouraged her from pursuing. "I kept thinking I was married to someone who was protective and involved," Jennifer told me during one of our occasional coffee meetings. "It took your situation to help me realize that there's a difference between being protective and being controlling. Marcus never let me make my own mistakes or learn from my own experiences." The custody arrangements for their children included provisions for family therapy, ensuring that Marcus's manipulative patterns wouldn't be passed on to the next generation. Watching him struggle to maintain relationships with his own children when he couldn't control the narrative was both satisfying and sad, a natural consequence of his choices, but also a loss for everyone involved. As I concluded my testimony at the courthouse that day, I looked out at the audience and saw several young women who reminded me of myself at various stages of my journey. Some looked confused and hurt, as if they were just beginning to recognize manipulation in their own lives. Others appeared determined and angry, ready to fight for their right to make their own choices and mistakes. After the hearing, a woman in her 20s approached me in the hallway. "My brother has been doing something similar," she said quietly, "managing my communications with other family members, speaking for me in important conversations, telling people what I think and feel without asking me. I never realized it was wrong until I heard your story." These conversations had become common since my experience gained public attention. Women from across the country contacted me through social media and email, sharing their own stories of family manipulation and asking for advice about how to reclaim their autonomy.
Each story was unique in its details, but familiar in its patterns. The gradual erosion of independence, the substitution of someone else's judgment for their own, the isolation from relationships that might provide alternative perspectives. Many of these women, like me, had initially felt grateful for their family members' help and protection before recognizing it as control. I had become an accidental expert on family manipulation, but I was comfortable with that role because it gave purpose to the pain Marcus had caused. Every woman who recognized her own situation in my story was a small victory for Grandma Rose's memory and a step toward preventing other families from experiencing similar betrayals. The foundation continued to grow, both in size and scope. We had expanded beyond scholarships to include workshops on recognizing manipulation, legal resources for victims of family fraud, and support groups for people recovering from controlling relationships. On the first anniversary of Grandma Rose's death, I visited her grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought a portfolio of photographs from the Invisible Manipulation series and a copy of the Foundation's annual report showing how many young women we had helped pursue their dreams despite family opposition. Standing there in the quiet cemetery, I finally felt ready to have the conversation with her that Marcus had stolen from us. I told her about the cell tower records, about Marcus's confession, about the foundation established in her memory. I explained how her belief in my potential had sustained me through the darkest period of grief and guilt. But mostly, I thanked her for seeing who I really was when others saw only who they thought I should be. Her faith in my capabilities had been the foundation that made everything else possible, including the strength to uncover the truth about Marcus's deception. As I walked back to my car, I realized that the woman leaving that cemetery was fundamentally different from the one who attended the funeral a year earlier. I had learned to trust my own perceptions, to value my own judgment, and to insist on my right to make my own choices and mistakes. Marcus had tried to teach me that putting myself first was selfish and destructive. Instead, I had learned that putting myself first was necessary and healthy, the only way to build authentic relationships based on truth rather than manipulation. The cell tower records that had exposed his lies had given me more than evidence of his betrayal. They had given me proof that my instincts were reliable, that my perceptions could be trusted, and that I was capable of uncovering truth even when others worked to hide it. Standing in that parking lot, looking back at Grandma Rose's grave, I made her a promise that I intended to keep for the rest of my life. I would never again allow someone else to speak for me, choose for me, or define reality for me. I would trust my own voice, make my own mistakes, and build my own relationships based on honesty rather than control. The woman who had once believed she was too busy to take her grandma's final calls had become someone who would never miss an opportunity to connect with the people she loved. And that transformation, born from pain but sustained by purpose, was perhaps the greatest gift Grandma Rose could have given me. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.